Okay, so we're going to start by looking at passenger lists on Ancestry. Okay, so what I have here is a list of just some of the largest data sets that Ancestry.com has. They have many more besides these, but I wanted to give you an idea of how many records they have in some of these collections. So you can see the top one here, the New York passenger and crew list has over 83 million records, and it covers 1820 up to 1957. And usually these later ones in the 50s are actually airplane passenger lists, not ship lists. And then after that, we have the United Kingdom and Ireland passenger lists, where if you add them together, it's almost 50 million records of outward and incoming passenger lists for UK and Ireland. Then we have another 9 million passenger lists for New York State, as opposed to the one up here that's for New York City. Then we also have Florida, Hawaii, Canada, Massachusetts, California, Hamburg. We have the border crossings from Mexico into the United States, border crossings from Canada to the United States, New Orleans, Washington State, Puerto Rico, Australia, Pennsylvania. And there's probably another 2 pages of passenger lists besides these, but these are just the ones that had the highest amount of records in the collections. And just going back to this top one with the New York passenger and crew lists, Ancestry has incorporated the records from the Castle Garden website as well as from the Ellis Island website. And we'll take a look at that Ellis Island one in a little bit. So I'm going to switch over. Oh, there we go. And we're going to go down to Ancestry. And again, Ancestry is still free with remote access until the end of June. We haven't heard yet if it's going to continue into July. So if you haven't used Ancestry yet, I would use it before the end of June. So in the search here, we'll go down to immigration and travel. And I'm going to use my mother's family again as an example because they happen to travel quite a bit. Okay, and when you look over to the left, they break it down into passenger lists, border crossings and passports, sorry, and citizenship records. So we're going to look on the passenger lists. And I wanted to show you a few examples of the different passenger lists manifests. So if we look at this one, this is from 1912. And over here, you can actually click and get a photo of what this ship looked like, which is pretty cool. And if we go here to the passenger manifest, you can see obviously it's handwritten. And if we blow it up a little, here is my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother, and my grandfather with his siblings. And here you can see they wrote wife and children and had them all bracketed together. Over here, I believe what they did was they wrote USC, which is US citizen, and they have the year that each one of the children was born. And up here, it's kind of hard to see, but it says Court of City Hall of New York in 1900 and a number. So this would have been my great-grandfather's naturalization information, though he was naturalized before 1900, but in any case, that's what they wrote. Now there is a second page to this, and if you click here, and we go to the second page, they're asking you whether you're going to join a relative or friend or who they might be. And in their space, they wrote that they were going home to Hudson Street in New York City, since that's where they were living at the time. Now, we'll look at one that's a little newer. Sorry. Doesn't seem to want to go back. Okay. So I wanted to show you, this one is from 1927. And again, you could get a picture of the ship, but now you can see that instead of being handwritten, we have a typewritten manifest. Here are my great-grandparents again and my grandfather's sister. And in this instance, they actually give you the city and state where my great-aunt was born, her birth date and her passport number. And then in this other column, we have yet a different year for my great-grandfather being naturalized. And now it says Southern District of New York, but it gives you a month and a day also. And it gives you over here their address where they were living in Bayshore. And this one does not have a second page like the first one did. Everything's just on the one sheet. And again, you could click on an image for the ship. Then we're going to go, this is one of my grandfather's cousins, and this is in 1949 now. And you can see there's not much information at all on this passenger manifest, but it does give you his age and where he was living in Manhattan, and his passport number and his place of birth, which actually is incorrect because he wasn't born here. He was actually born in Turkey. So just an example of how information may not always be correct on the sheets. And this is actually his sister, his daughter, sorry, Marie. And she was born in France, so her information's correct. On the next page of results, I wanted to show you, this is actually the passenger list for when my great-great-grandmother came to the United States with 3 of her children. So I was pretty excited when I found this the first time. This is my great-great-grandmother and 3 of my great-grandfather's siblings. And this is their arrival from Turkey to New York. They came in 1896. Up here you can see the date, October 19th, the name of the ship. And then over here, it's how many pieces of luggage they have with them. So you can see from these older passenger lists that there's not as much information about the person than there were in some of the newer forms. And there's one other one on this page. That I just wanted to show because this passenger list, oh, where are they? This passenger list happens to be my grandfather and grandmother on their honeymoon. They went to Bermuda on their honeymoon, and there they are on the passenger list. And I just thought that was kind of cool. So let me now go over to, oops, I'm sorry. Switch over to information you could find on Family Search for passenger lists. I wasn't able to get a list from them according to the record size of the collections. So what I did was I wanted to give you an example of some of the countries and states that you could find in FamilySearch.org. So here you can see we've got Australia, Brazil, quite a few from California, quite a few from Florida, with Guam, Hawaii, Japan, New Orleans, Baltimore, Boston, and then we've also got a similar collection of records for New York like we had on Ancestry. But Family Search does have this one from Ogdensburg, New Zealand, Pennsylvania, Texas. Down here we have New England passenger and crew lists, Vermont, Virginia, Washington State. So if we go over to Family Search, you need to sign in with your username and password. And then we're going to go to records. I'm going to use the same family. And then when you get your results from the record search, you can click here on this tab that says collections, and you can scroll down to migration and naturalization. So you can see they also have the Ellis Island records here and New York passenger lists. But what I wanted to show you today was this one called Book Indexes to Passenger Lists, because it's pretty interesting. So this is pretty much what it says it is. It's a little confusing because they don't actually give you the year as you're looking at the search results. But if we open up one of these records, I found that if you click on the information tab, down here it tells you the year that it's the White Star Line. And if we blow it up, my uncle here was added as a correction to the passenger list. So I went back a page or two, let's see. And this is actually the information, the front page of the booklet, so that he was on the ship, the Olympic on White Star Line. And here's the date that it sailed from Southampton to New York. And then it gives you the information about the crew, and it starts the list of the passengers that were on that ship. Okay. then we also had a few more examples. And this one is kind of a mess. You can see the book they were using. You can see the alphabetical tabs here. Here are my relatives listed. Sorry. But I had no idea what this ship was they were on. So I went backwards again. And you cannot really see it unless you can adjust the image, the brightness here. And so I was able to see then that it was an alphabetical list of passengers on board for the French line Niagara that was arriving in New York on September 10th, 1913. So you have to do a little investigation for some of these records to figure out what year and what ship the people were on. And here's another one. With my relative traveling in first class this time. So this one here, he is on the Zealand from Antwerp to New York in 1922. And there's my grandfather's cousin. And it even has information on this other page about the meals being served on the ship, the bar, and different services that they have available on the ship. So I just thought this was quite an interesting collection to take a look through. Sorry, I think there's one more. And this one actually is my trip to Bermuda from New York, and it's my, up here at the top is my grandparents and my mother, who would have been about 1 year old at the time. So, okay, so now I wanted to go over to our handout and just run through some of these websites having to do with passenger lists. I found some for other countries that I thought might be of interest. And, but of course, the first one would have to be the Ellis Island website. And this takes you to the passenger search page. When this website first came out in 2001, so many people tried to get onto it that they actually crashed the website. But as years have gone by, this information now has been included in Ancestry.com and Family Search that we were just on, as well as other databases. So it really isn't unique anymore as it was when it first came online. But here you can see you could do exact matching, close matches sounds like, but we'll just do a quick search. So here are some of my relatives that show up. So you can see that it'll give you the date, the year the ship arrived, the ship name. So these are just some of my relatives. And then when you click on one of them, it would show you the ship manifest, a ship image if they have one, and the passenger record. And again, you have to set up a free account. And so once I sign in, there's the photo of the ship where it was departing from. If you want to pay the money, you can get a little certificate printed out. So mostly this site now is more for them to make money by selling images than anything else. But, and then here's an image of the passenger list. But again, nowadays you can find this also on Ancestry or MyHeritage. And there's my relative down at the bottom. You can save the searches that you do on here, but that's pretty much what they have available. And then I also included the link to the actual Ellis Island National Park Service website. And here you could read more about the history of Ellis Island. They give you tips on how to trace your ancestor. And Ellis Island actually opened in 1892 to receive passengers, and it stopped receiving passengers at the end of 1924 because after that legislation came in and immigrants were being processed at the U.S. consulate offices abroad instead of being processed when they arrived in New York. So that's why the passenger lists in the database go from 1892 to 1924. Before that, people were processed at Castle Garden, which is also in Lower Manhattan, up until 1890. And they were using a barge office temporarily while Ellis Island was built from 1890 to 1892. And there was a fire on Ellis Island in 1897 that destroyed a lot of the original passenger lists, but copies of these passenger lists were kept in Manhattan in the Custom House building. And so we didn't really lose the information, even though the fire had destroyed, some of those passenger lists. So in this case, there was a backup, and that's what was used to create some of the records that are used on the database. Now, the National Archives also has passenger list records. And these are specific just to certain groups. We have the immigration of Russians. We have the Irish famine immigrants, Germans to the United States, and Italians to the United States. And you can search for them on this webpage. There's also some libraries still have some of the books that this information came from. And I believe on Family Search, you can also search these same databases. This website is a collection of passenger arrival records from different ports all over the country. So, and this person gives you guides to how to search the different ports like Philadelphia, Baltimore, New Orleans, Texas. He even has Pennsylvania German pioneers on his site, Irish. So this is a good place to start if you're not sure how to go about searching some of these records. He also has these passenger departure records and some naturalization records. then I was just searching on the internet to see what type of international sites might be available for passenger lists. So this one's from Bremen in Germany. And we can just switch it over to English over here. Okay, because a lot of these passenger lists from Bremen were destroyed, really the only ones that survived are from 1920 to 1939, because as it says, these other lists were lost during World War II. And here's where you can search over here. They also have ship names, harbor destinations. There's also Danish immigration lists that I found. And again, you can just switch this over to English. And these records go up to 1908. And it gives you some information on how many people are in this database. We also have Norwegian passenger lists here, same thing. And here's the dates for that, 1825 to 1873. And all of these are, free to search. Now this next one, the searching is free, but then you have to pay actually for the records. This is a German immigrants database. That's from the museum at Bremerhaven. And you can search for relatives here, but only the searching part is free. If you actually wanted more details, you would have to pay a fee. And I think it may have been 15 euros for this. Irish, these. Here's more information on Irish ship records and books that have published passenger lists from Ireland. I'm going to skip over this for now. This website is been around for quite a long time, and this is a site that has transcribed passenger lists and put them online. So if you wanted to look at New York, and these go back quite a ways, some of them back into the early 1800s, and you could click on any of these links and it would give you the transcription of the passenger list for that ship. The ships list is good if you're looking for descriptions of ships. If you were curious about a ship your ancestor came on, you could go to look up its name and it'll give you the details about when it was built, what typical routes that it took, when it was retired or dismantled. And this article was very interesting about interpreting passenger list annotations, because sometimes things were written in columns, and each one of these you could click on and read interpretations on what some of the writing might be, like USC for US citizen, or they had stamps for US citizens. One of my relatives, it was stamped non-immigrant because they were just visiting, they weren't going to stay in New York. And this site, you could actually look at what the different column headings are for these different time periods. So you could see what questions they were asking the people on the ships. And this is the only place I've actually found it written out like this. So it's very useful. And I just wanted to point out, in addition, these two books down here are really good if background reading for working with passenger lists, and especially this one about Ellis Island. And this book has been digitized about European passenger steamship arrivals. And you can actually open the book and it tells you by year, and we'll just blow off one page. You can actually see what ships were coming into New York every day of the year, and they're sorted by steamship company line. So we'll go on to some military records. Again, here's a list I came up with from Ancestry according to the size of the collections they have on military records. So the largest collection right now is World War II draft cards for young men. That was collected from 1940 to 1947. And then you can see we've got Marine Corps, Navy records, World War I and World War II draft registration cards, Department of Veterans Affairs death files, Army enlistment records, hospital admission card files, veterans grave sites, records from Veterans Administration, Civil War soldier records and profiles, Civil War pension index, Civil War draft registration records, and Confederate soldiers, and headstone applications. So those are the collections that had 2 million records or more on Ancestry. And when we looked at the Ancestry.com New York website the other week, these are collections that are on that web page that you can always have access to through the New York State Archives. So the largest group of records they have are these National Guard records. So you can see they have National Guard in World War I, enlistment cards, and service cards. And then they also have records from the Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Civil War, World War I, and World War II enlisted men cards. So that's just to give you an idea of what you might find. Of course, Ancestry has many more military collections than just these, but we'll take a look at some of the more popular ones. Okay. Okay, so we'll go over to military. So at the beginning here, these are actually probably the collections that people are using the most. Here's one of the World War II draft card for young men, where it's giving you the man's address, how old he is, where he was born, and where the name of the person who will always know your address, which happens to be one of his cousins. My relative was working for the American Embassy in Paris, and I believe, and then when you go to the next page, it gives you a physical description of him, and that he fills out this card in January 11th, 1945. And this relative of mine actually went to the Nuremberg trials and was an interpreter during those trials in Germany. Then we have World War I draft registration cards, which were done in 1917 and 1918. This one, my uncle filled out in September 1918. And again, it's the same information where he was living, his birth date, but in this case, it doesn't tell you where he was born, what his job was, his nearest relative, which happens to be his mother, and he was working for his father in Manhattan. He also has a physical description over here. We have World War II draft registration cards. And again, oops, this case, my relative has his phone number here, where he was living, his employer again. And well, he's a little turned around, but his physical description. And here from the Department of Veterans Affairs death file is information about my uncle. And in these files, you actually will find out their enlistment date, the date they were discharged, and then what branch of service they served in, and as well as his birth date and death date. That I have one relative who was in the Civil War, and so we'll see a different set of records for him. Okay, so military. So this relative of mine was in the Navy in the Civil War. So he shows up in US Navy records. He also ended up in a home for disabled soldiers in Tennessee. And here it's very interesting because here's his page. It gives you a lot of information about him, about when he was serving, when he was discharged, the disabilities that caused him to be admitted into the home, a physical description of him, his spouse's name, which is important, and where she was living while he was in this home. And it was showing you even how much money he was getting for his pension. And then over here about location of grave, it says he died at Long Branch, New Jersey while on furlough. And I had found out that he actually had been sent from this home to New Jersey to have an operation, and either he died during the operation or right after it. But he actually had been a resident of this home before that. So, yeah. Family Search also has military records, but not quite as extensive collection as Ancestry does. And for Family Search, I just tried breaking it down more according to time period to give you an idea that they have Revolutionary War, War of 1812, these are all Civil War records here in the middle. They also have that collection of homes for disabled veteran soldiers, information about the headstones. So there are collections that overlap between Family Search and Ancestry, but it's always good to check both of them because you never know with misspellings and indexing. You might find something in one database and not the other. And so we'll just do a search on him. And again, we go over to, this time we'll go over to military. And he didn't show up. So they also have this record we looked at about the homes. Yes. So this is an index. Oh, yeah, again, this is a little dark, but, and this did not, here it is. Let's see if we can see it. This is actually, oops, sorry, an index to military pension files. And my great-grandmother applied to have his pension transferred to her after he died. And this is, let's see if I can brighten it up a little more. This was information about his pension and that she was, what his rank was in the Navy, and that she was his widow, and that he originally had applied for an invalid pension, and now she was, after his death, going to be receiving it as a widow. So let's close out of here. Okay. This is not good. Okay. So here are some websites that can help you with military research. This is the National Archives. And in this database, you can search by particular wars that you know, different time periods by type of war. And you would just click on the time period you're interested in to search these different collections that they have. This one I've used many, many times. If you can't find your relative in a cemetery you think they might be buried in, if they served in a war, they could be in a veterans cemetery. And here they have a list of all the veterans cemeteries in the country. I have a relative buried here. And it's not just the veteran who can be buried here, but also their spouse. So here's my uncle who served in World War II, and it's his birth and death date and the section that he's buried in, and you can even pull up a map of the cemetery. So if you are looking for where a veteran relative might be buried, that's a good place to try. And this one is for overseas burials, where you can do a burial search here. And it gives you a list of the cemeteries overseas for people who died in World War I or World War II. And they also let you search, and here's all the different cemeteries that are included in their website. Okay, this site here is good for general information, and you could click on any of these conflicts and it'll take you to other links about where you could find records for that particular war. Okay. There, oh, this did not turn out to be a clickable link. Okay. Oh. Let me just Sorry, let me see if this will let me in. It works at home and it doesn't work here. I'll try one more time. No. All right, let me. Okay. This fold3.com is a subscription website that's owned by Ancestry, but they do have free records. And if you create a username and password, you can take a look, as you see here, the ones that are marked free, anyone has access to. And I was trying to get to this one. These War of 1812 pension files are free on this website, and you can search by state. If you had any ancestors, and you can actually look at the whole pension file. So that's one of the better databases that they have that's free for anybody to take a look at. And again, if you just can click through the different wars and look for the ones that are marked free, like Medal of Honor recipients. Sometimes they have photos. They have these New York State reports. So that's something you might want to try. Let's go back. Okay, we also have some Civil War websites here where you can search the graves of Civil War soldiers. And this is through the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War. This is a National Park Service database. The Soldiers and Sailors database, where you can look by regiments also, and it explains about the battles, cemeteries involved with the Civil War. We have a digitized book that I found in Family Search that is for World War I casualty records, and you can look up any state in this book, and it'll give you actually photos along with information of the soldiers. So if you opened it up, just go to a page. Okay. Yeah, so here, each person actually has their photo and their name and where they were from. We also have the World War II Memorial, and you can search the registry here for information on World War II veterans. We have another website. Again, that's a general guide for all kinds of information about World War II research. Korean War veterans. Again, you can search by different criteria, state, last name, the units that they were in. We have the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, where you could search to see if someone has been put on the wall of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. This is a set up by the Library of Congress for prisoner of war and missing in action Vietnam veterans. And then down here, I wanted to point out a few sites that are specific to New York State. So the New York State Archives up in Albany has this page that tells you about the types of military records you could get from the New York State Archives. They have forms you can fill out to request records. They have a name index that you could search. The records that they keep at that state archives, though, end at World War I. You won't be able to get any information past that. But they are good with Civil War, Spanish-American War, World War I. And they have these different guides where you can look by time period, and it'll explain to you what type of information you could get from them. Okay. We also have the New York State Military Museum, and they have, among other things, veteran burial locations that you can search. The New York State Military Museum is really heavy in information about the New York State National Guard. So if you had someone in your family that was in the National Guard, this would be a good place to look for more information about them. And see, they also have a link to Revolutionary War soldiers buried in New York. They have other collections over here. They have Medal of Honor recipients affiliated with New York, information about different units of the National Guard, the National Guardsman magazine that they put out. These were men who were enlisted in 1940. They were sent into active military service before World War II started. And they have cards for the men that were involved in this also. And they also have reports that were written by the head of the National Guard every year that was sent to the New York State Adjutant General. And you can look through these reports because they have, many times they list a lot of the people in the National Guard unit for that year. And these reports you can search by year. And you can see there's an awful lot of them. Okay. Then during about 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, there was a World War I Centennial Commission set up around the country. And there is a page that's set up for New York having to do with World War I. And if you scroll down a bit, down here, if you clicked on here, this would give you a list of all the New Yorkers who died during World War I, and also the New Yorkers who were Medal of Honor recipients in World War I, as well as information on this specific National Guard division. And then just poking around the internet a little bit, I found, just as an example, a few counties that had military records. So this Yates County actually has information regarding the War of 1812, the Civil War, and World War I. And you can actually look at, the books that they have. I found in Buffalo, a web page just dealing with the Army soldiers who served at the Buffalo Barracks back, as you can see, in the early 1800s. And up in Delaware County, they have quite a large number of, oops, sorry about that, items. I don't know what's going on with my computer. Okay. So, and I think my battery's about to die. So it's a good thing we're almost at the end. So you can see Delaware County has quite a few military records just pertaining to their county that go through all the different wars. So other counties, I'm sure, have similar information. So let me stop the sharing. Any questions before my computer dies on me? Oh, did you mute yourself, Georgina?
Thanks a lot, Jean.
Okay.
It's very
Yeah. Sorry about the battery going. I didn't even know it was at the end.
I don't know, I just
Okay.
signed up with Heritage. And I was
Oh, yeah?
yeah, I was